we're going to be giving you the chance to relive one of the great matches in wrestling history. That being Big Daddy versus Giant Haystacks at the Dale Martin Extravaganza at Wembley Arena, 1981. What you're seeing with this match is the two biggest wrestlers, not just of their era, but I think in the history of British wrestling, coming together for a rare singles match. They teased the fact that the two of them would have a match for years and years and years. They never quite got them together. And this was the culmination of probably a decade of fudging round the two of them meeting. You have Big Daddy. And Big Daddy comes in. He is in his 50s when he's at the zenith of his fame. He is a big celebrity. And part of the reason that he is so he's important to people because unusually for this time, a very grey time, a very sort of bleak time. Miserable time. What Big Daddy is he's a famous person that you can go and see at your local hall. He is going to be there every month and you can see someone that you've seen on the telly. It's really hard to get across that in the most of the 80s, the idea of seeing someone famous was almost like zero.
Yeah.
You would never get to see someone. And Big Daddy was a star that you could not only see, but you could see him do his job. And he would give you a high five on the way to the ring. High fives didn't exist back then. He would give you a handshake and maybe a hair towel. You could come into contact with someone famous. And there was nobody else like that in the whole of sport. Even footballers, you could go and watch them play a match, but you wouldn't be able to sort of press the flesh with them. And so Big Daddy became this unique figure. While Big Daddy was incredibly popular with crowds, he was atrocious in the ring. And he does have the blame by a lot of good wrestlers. They put the blame at his feet for killing British professional wrestling. Their big thing is once Big Daddy came along, people were like, this is, crap. There is no art to it. Big Daddy could not wrestle. Part of the reason for that was he was so big, no one could do anything with him. And he couldn't really do any moves. So people sort of said, well, people came to see wrestling and they would go, this is shit. How can this be real when this guy is so immobile and he only does 3 moves and he beats everybody? The counter argument to that is, well, the thing is, Big Daddy, he was always a draw. He got bums on seats and the rest of the card, they were performing at a high level. Well, why was it that the audiences didn't go, I've now seen the high level stuff and I love it and I'll keep coming? They didn't. British wrestling to some degree dies as Big Daddy is dying. And unfortunately, Big Daddy was sort of dying before he'd actually ended his career. There is a brilliant, one of those once in a lifetime things that happened with Big Daddy. And that's when you have a big, big hero. What you need is a big, big villain to make that hero have something to fight against and to be seen in conjunction with. You've got Batman and the Joker. You've got your Superman and Lex Luthor. You've got the detective in charge of the Yorkshire Ripper case and Whipside Jack. And what you had Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. And for a decade, they were on opposite sides of the ring. One was the big hero and the other was the big villain. And together they made something very, very special. Big Daddy, he's a guy called Shirley Crabtree, shared the same name as his father. And again, a little bit like the Johnny Cash Boy Named Sue track. The idea was, this was a name that you would have to get tough if you bore that name. He comes from Halifax in West Yorkshire. He was born in 1930. And before he started wrestling, he worked down the mines and he was also a rugby league player for Bradford Northern.
His son's a league player, isn't he?
He is, yes, that's right. He followed his father into the wrestling rings. His brothers did the same thing from 1952. But he just couldn't make it work. And he dropped out of wrestling. Some of the wrestlers say he spent a long time on the dole, which obviously is not one of the stories that they want, when Big Daddy returns. They sort of go, where's he been for the last 15 years? Oh, he's been signing on. But in 1976, his brother Max watches the film Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And he sees Burl Ives as the character Big Daddy.
Big Daddy.
Big Daddy. And so they'd say, well, Shirley, do you want another go? And you're going to come back as Big Daddy. Shirley's wife makes him...
Can't be Paul Newman.
Shirley's wife makes him a leotard. It has a big D on the front. Big D energy.
Big D energy.
He's got a big D. That was cut out of their chintz sofa at home.
Wow.
They just sort of went, let's make this work. By that time, he weighed 26 stone. But he'd got a little bit of publicity because he was in the Guinness Book of Records for having one of the biggest chests in Britain. He had a 64-inch chest. And he became a very sort of simple, sort of like symbol of good. Really.
So like a simplistic idiot sort of thing, kind of like a village kind of strongman who just
not even that.
Just actually
he was just like a sort of avuncular nice guy.
Well, wrestling's full of baddies and goodies, and the biggest goodie of them all is Big Daddy. I think you can put me down now.
Very well. There you are, my darling. I've always been a kind of extrovert personality, and I like that kind of thing. But they bring the most beautiful children to wrestling. You'll see them tonight, and there's mums and dads and lovely families. And a lot of people that don't know a lot about professional wrestling couldn't believe that we would get the types of people who come to wrestling.
He's a really interesting bloke. You sort of hit on, I mean, what is Big Daddy?
What is Big
What
Daddy?
is it? What he was he had incredibly kind eyes, and he had beautiful sort of blue eyes, and there was just something about him.
Paul Newman.
He's very warm, and he very early on cottoned on to the fact that what he wouldn't be someone who, people who loved wrestling and, talked about the stats and who was the best would like. He would appeal to the children and the grannies.
Yeah.
And the children and the grannies were a key part of the audience. They didn't really have anyone on the bills who was geared towards the kids.
Well, I bet the grannies are just kind of like, because grannies, their natural kind of thing is to want to feed young lads up.
Yes.
And that guy, that would be like their Sistine Chapel, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I would love to have a crack.
I've told this story before, but I met Big Daddy when he was doing a performance in Boreham Woods, the venue, in 1992. He came out and he asked me, had I ever thought about becoming a wrestler? And what he was a really nice, warm, kind, gentle guy. And he was friendly, and he exuded good vibes.
Oh,
really
Mark,
nice
that's
thing.
nice.
On the opposite side, of course, you've got Giant Haystacks. And Haystacks...
Equally bad at wrestling?
I mean, Haystacks could wrestle.
Right.
He was almost like an Abdullah the Butcher in that he had a limited moveset, but what he did, he could do well.
Right.
There's a short period right at the end of his career where, surprisingly, he turns up in WCW as Loch Ness. And he was being geared
What year
for
was this?
a feud. This is 1995.
Fuck.
He is being geared for a feud with Hulk Hogan.
Wow.
His final match in WCW was going to be against Lex Luger,
Right.
but Luger's attacked before the ring and it doesn't happen. And I hate everyone involved in that for not having the ability to be able to say there was a Lex Luger versus Giant Haystacks match.
Fantastic.
Haystacks, at the end of his WCW run, he found out that he had cancer.
Yeah.
And so he came back to Britain. I mean, it's so sad that we didn't get to see Hulk Hogan versus Loch Ness.
Yeah.
It would have been atrocious, but it would have been a brilliant coda, a last note for Haystacks' glorious career.
What happens if you get your hands on Jimmy Hart? Do I dare speculate, Loch Ness?
I can't tell you what I'm going to do with him because it won't be allowed on TV. But you can imagine, Mean Gene, when I get my hands on him, he'll know all about it.
He was a big old boy.
Yeah.
And he suffered a lot as a kid from bullying. And it slightly seems to have just made him very, very self-aware, and he hated people coming up to him and saying, "You're that bloody Haystacks, aren't you?" He didn't like it at all. And so he had quite a surly reputation. He was, in real life, a very private and religious man. He wouldn't wrestle on Sundays because he went to church. He had a wife, Rita, and they had a lot of kids. And they just lived a normal life other than the fact that he is the most hated monster in Britain. He didn't like wrestling at the start. He didn't like the way people looked at him as a monster. But he came to love it, which is great. I like it when that happens.
Yeah.
He said in one late interview, he said, "I felt like a conductor of the Halley Orchestra, able to play on people's emotions, making them hate me or love me as I decreed. The showman in me was starting to show." It's funny to think about Haystacks as a showman because he was just like a frightening monster who just growled.
Cod.
Yeah, it really was. And this is the match where they finally come together. This was the match that sold all the tickets, but it wasn't the main event of the night. You do not go out on a Big Daddy Giant Haystacks match if you want people to go, and what a great wrestling match. So incredibly, above them in the card was Wayne Bridges, the world champion, taking on Jim Harris, who would later go back to America and become Kamala. Now, when Kamala, you go, we need better work rate than this, calling Kamala, you know that these guys are not going to be great. He has his entrance. He comes out. Mick McManus opens the door. Mick McManus with his beautiful black vampire hairdo.
Mick McManus. So I went back and I watched the Big Daddy This Is Your Life. A concept I don't think Big Daddy was necessarily across. Even when the host, I can't remember who
Eamon
it is.
Andrews.
Eamon Andrews takes off the mask because he turns up as a masked wrestler. He takes off the mask and then he gets his book out.
Yeah.
Still, Shirley Crabtree not really
Big
understanding
Daddy
what's
is
going on.
so confused by Eamon Andrews taking the mask off that he can't recover for the whole of the recording. And everyone who comes out, he's sort of going, "What's this? You know, what is it?" So a voice will go, "Remember, I met you, and we certainly ate a lot of pies, even as a nipper." ever. And he'd be going, what?
He's just confused, isn't he?
That's right. It's your old primary school teacher, Mrs. And he'd be going, why is she here?
I think he's been on the road for too long. He's never watched any telly.
Yeah, he's so humble in that
yeah.
whole thing. He's so delightful and sort of like a big toddler. Where he's like, thank you, thank you.
And then Mick McManus comes out and his hair is astonishing. Like pitch black, bitumen black and thick like bitumen too.
The big question about British wrestling has always been, is Mick McManus's hair fixed? It's an amazing thing. Mick McManus, of course, would never admit to the fact that his hair was dyed.
Incredible.
It was done with fucking boot black. I mean, it's so bad. As they have Big Daddy, the door is opened and a little child runs out first, and then Big Daddy comes out putting his top hat on. And I was just thinking, that doesn't look great in retrospect. It's, the Loch dressing room, a child running out, and then Big Daddy putting some clothes back on. Yeah. Oh, don't know how that top hat got knocked askance. And out they come. There's a lot of empty seats they show as he comes out. It's a bad little bit of a camera angle. And he just comes out and it's like there are 3 people in the arena. He is, at this point, I think 24 stone, they announce him as. Giant Haystacks, they say, is 40. Big Daddy is more than 24 stone here. He is looking very, very rotund. On his bum, he's got the phrase, sock it to him.
Sock it to him.
Stitched on, and off they go. At this time, Big Daddy, again, to sort of like convey how big he was, he had his own weekly strip in Buster, where he'd have comic strip adventures.
Right.
He was on This Is Your Life. He was in Daddy's Sauce adverts. He appeared on the bottles
Daddy's Sauce,
of Daddy's Sauce.
I remember that.
And the crowd absolutely roar for him. I mean, he is a proper star. They lock up, the two of them. And to go through this match, Pete, is the match itself is so short.
Yeah.
And it was seen at the time as being a very big disappointment because people were like, we've waited a long time for this. And this is barely a match.
Yeah.
They lock up, their bellies are in the way, and they can't quite get to each other's heads. Already it's like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Can we have some slow kicks from Haystacks, please?
Oh, what about shoulder block? Why doesn't Daddy do a shoulder block where he runs into you? There are some forearms. There was one bit where Big Daddy runs into Haystacks in the corner with a shoulder block, and it's actually, you suddenly go, Christ, you do forget these guys are actually quite tough.
Yeah.
And it's a thudding fucking shoulder block. What you see there is you see Big Daddy. This guy is, if you grabbed his belly and shook it, it's not going to go like a sheet.
No.
It's not going to go ripple, ripple, ripple.
No. It's taut.
It wouldn't move.
Heavy.
It would just be like, I don't know, compacted feces. Like
Probably was,
concretey. It would just be, you'd punch it and it would just be like concrete, but then maybe 10 minutes after there'd be a really weird, like bloody blotch appearing. Something's not gone right.
Ref was good in this match, flopping around.
He was good. A little old man.
Yeah.
I like little old men refs. Yes. I just like it. It throws you straight back to that period where everyone's like, I'm a young man. I'm not going to get involved in British wrestling. So they have to go, all right, let's go to Joe. He's 75. Joe, how do you fancy making a tanner, mate? Well, I'll give it a go. Wonderful. The referee gets hit by Haystacks, and Daddy, because he's the good guy, goes straight over to the referee to sort of like touch him with his great big hand. I had that hand on my shoulder once. It weighed a ton. He goes to that, and Haystacks knocks him over, and Daddy sort of splashes the ref. It's not good. You cannot say it's good by any standard.
It's unwatchable.
Was it also quite entertaining?
It was quite entertaining. A lot of, again, the kind of world of sport era of wrestling. People just getting in, getting really close to the ring. Because this time, the only people that are blocking them are cameramen. There are loads of cameramen.
Yeah, aren't
really
there? Well, this match ends. They'd basically tried to make it as exciting as they could by they'd said, we're getting rid of the rounds system that we normally have in every match. And this match can only end with a knockout. And so what happens here, this is a 3-minute match. And Haystacks goes over the top rope and he falls through a table at ringside, which is festooned with flowers.
Flowers and little kind of wreaths.
Yeah.
Like someone's died.
He goes through that. He lands on his bum, but they are like, well, there's no coming back from that. And it's just,
Shane McMahon.
This is unbelievable. Could you only do 3 minutes? The funny thing about Daddy, he toured all over Britain all the time, but he would only ever do tag team matches. And his partner would be someone who was very, very good at flying around. They would do all the work. They would do all the wrestling. They would take all the abuse. And Daddy would tag in. And within a minute, he would have splashed someone and done the pin.
Yeah.
So Big Daddy, basically for this show, is going, well, special show. I'll go 3 times the normal length. and that works out as 3 minutes. But what happens every year, the Wrestling Observer has its Hall of Fame, where wrestling journalists, former wrestlers, current wrestlers, and people involved in the industry get together and they have a ballot and they decide who is going to go into the Wrestling Observer's Hall of Fame. The Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is the most recognised, credible Hall of Fame in the entire wrestling business, taken very seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the big issues with someone on the ballot has been, in recent years, Big Daddy. And the reason for that is most British people, especially wrestling historians, would say Big Daddy is historically important enough that he belongs in the Wrestling Observer's Hall of Fame.
He's the most famous, for British audiences, wrestler.
He has been dead for over a quarter of a century. And yet, if you say to anyone, name a British wrestler, everyone will say Big Daddy.
Yeah.
There is no question about that. The problem is, all the people who work with him are like, there's no way he belongs in that Hall of Fame. It's a pro wrestling Hall of Fame, not a big fat idiot Hall of Fame. Again, you'd watch this and you go, is this a Hall of Fame worthy wrestler? You would go, no. Unless that Hall of Fame is about being a disabled egg. The reality is, it doesn't convey, and you can see the reaction of the crowd, it just doesn't convey what Big Daddy was, rather than how he performed. And if, of course Big Daddy should be in the Hall of Fame. There is no doubt about that. You might be thinking, well, of course, the natural thing for us to do is to go to a pilgrimage to Big Daddy's grave.
Yeah.
There is no Big Daddy's grave.
Buried at sea like Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, they pushed him back out. like, they had to blow him up with dynamite like those whales that get stranded. He was cremated, and his wife is believed to have scattered his ashes in the back garden of the property she lives in, I believe, Stockport.
Lazy.
Yes, I'd like to be able to pay tribute to Big Daddy by splashing his grave.
She's probably doing a bit every day. Probably took ages.
There's a big hill in the garden. Stop playing on Grandad. Before we go any further, this is also the point where Big Daddy is at the highest point in his cultural recognition in Britain. 1981. I do have vague memories of what 1981 was like. And I thought what would be best is if I tried to sum it up, Pete, it's like a performance art piece.
Right, okay.
But I'm going to try and sum up using son et lumière.
Right.
I'm going to try and sum up what 1981 in Britain was like.
Okay.
Okay? Here we go. Bow, 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 down, 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 down. Liver and onions. Please show your appreciation for the roly-polies. Right, I got one scampi, I got one chicken in a basket. The ladies not for turning.
Oh, Mark.
Liver and onions. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
Is that the Yorkshire Ripper?
No, we're side
Well, you're
Jack.
side Jack, sorry.
A pint of Shandy Bass, one for yourself, Cheryl. There will be no surrender by the IRA. Liver and onions. Yes, whatever love means. And if you want to slow it down. And Steve Davis has won the World Snooker Champion. Oh, you can't get me. I'm part of a union where the boys do trust. I got another 5 pages. Liver and onions. It looks to me like you might have this new disease, which they're calling AIDS. Oh, what's the matter, you? Hey, Derek Hatton just told me that John Lennon's dead. Underground, overground, tied to a tree. The women of Wimbledon, common are we. Liver and onions. That is 1981. Now,
I can see why you wanted to put this on the main feed, Mark.
9 days' work, Pete.